Stand up or I'll arrest you for loitering. That's what Officer Riley barked at a calm, elderly black woman, quietly waiting by gate 6. No threat, no disruption, just her skin, her silence, and a book in her hand. Within minutes, she was handcuffed in front of stunned travelers and children. What the officer didn't know, she wasn't just any passenger. She was the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. This isn't a scene from 1963. This happened at a modern American airport. As James Baldwin once wrote, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time." Today's rage is not chaos, it's clarity. Watch this story unfold and ask yourself, how many times will we repeat this pattern before real change begins? If this moved you, like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more true stories that America can't afford to ignore. A cold wind swept through Terminal B of Chicago International Airport that morning, sending a shiver down the spine of nearly everyone who wasn't in a rush. Businessmen in tailored suits gripped coffee cups tighter. Families in line juggled boarding passes, and crying toddlers, and at Gate 14, where the line for TSA pre-check looped like a coiled snake, no one paid much attention to the elderly black woman slowly approaching the checkpoint, until 2 airport officers suddenly blocked her path. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step aside," said Officer Brian Keegan, his voice flat, already pulling on the latex gloves that always accompanied his extra screenings. The woman paused. She was dressed impeccably in a dark burgundy coat, a matching hat, and a leather handbag worn but well cared for. Her hair, silver and tightly curled beneath the brim, framed a face that looked as though it had seen many decades and survived all of them. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm but resolute. "You've been flagged," said the second officer, a younger white woman named Officer Sandra Blake, already snapping open the zipper on her inspection kit. "Flagged? For what?" "We don't have to tell you that, ma'am," Keegan said. "You can cooperate or miss your flight." The line behind her shifted uncomfortably. Some passengers looked down at their phones pretending not to see. Others looked directly at her. Curious, judgmental, indifferent. One young woman near the end of the line hit record on her phone. "Just in case." "Where are you headed?" Officer Blake asked, now pulling out a cotton swab. "Washington, D.C., the woman replied. "I'm attending a hearing." "Business or personal?" "Both." There was a pause as Blake looked the woman up and down. "Well, your ID says you're Julianne Carter. These initials on your luggage, JC, match, but you'll understand if we need to verify further." "Actually," the woman said, placing her carry-on gently on the inspection table, "I won't understand that at all. I've passed through 3 airports this week without incident. I've been cleared through pre-check for over a decade. This feels less like procedure and more like profiling." Blake's jaw clenched. "We don't profile, ma'am." "No," the woman said, "but you do pick." Keegan stepped closer. "Watch the attitude." Another officer approached from the corner of the security area. He was younger, Latino, and clearly uncomfortable. "Is there an issue here?" "Not yet," Keegan muttered. "But she's making it one." The woman raised an eyebrow. "My name is Chief Justice Julianne Carter of the United States Supreme Court. And you're both violating federal protocols with this search. Unless you've got a warrant, or a supervisor with better judgment, I suggest you stop." The terminal froze. Even the rolling luggage seemed to pause. But Keegan just scoffed. "Yeah, right. And I'm the president. You think I'm joking?" "I think you're trying to bluff your way out of a random screening," Blake added. "Step over here. Now." The justice sighed and didn't move. "You are detaining me without probable cause." Keegan's hand hovered near his belt. "Last chance, ma'am." The young Latino officer stepped forward again. "Wait, maybe we should move," Keegan barked. And then, without another word, he reached for the handcuffs on his belt. "You're making a very serious mistake," Julianne Carter said quietly, just as the cold steel locked around her wrists. That's when the cell phones really started recording. 15 minutes later, Justice Carter was seated in a dimly lit holding room in the airport's private security wing. The cuffs had left faint red marks around her wrists. A paper cup of lukewarm water sat untouched on the metal table. Her handbag had been emptied and searched. Her luggage was still outside, half unzipped, personal items spilling onto the floor like discarded dignity. She didn't speak, not when Officer Blake returned to the room, not when she offered no apology, not when she smugly said, "We're working on verifying your identity." The room smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. Somewhere beyond the frosted glass, the airport announcements droned on in indifferent tones. Final boarding for Flight 76 to Washington, D.C. "You missed your flight," Blake said, almost mockingly. "I'll take the next one," Julianne replied, her tone unshaken. "Oh, you're still going, huh? Even after this?" Julianne didn't look at her. Especially after this. The silence that followed was short-lived. Outside, in the main terminal, phones buzzed with new alerts. Twitter feeds lit up with a 23-second clip showing an elderly black woman, dignified, calm, being handcuffed by a white officer, while asserting, "I'm a federal judge." The video hit 10,000 views in an hour. Then the phone rang in the office of the airport's director of security. He didn't recognize the number at first. It was unlisted, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "This is Chief Counsel Annette Hargrove, speaking on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General. I need to know why Chief Justice Julianne Carter was just arrested at your airport." The director nearly dropped the receiver. She wasn't arrested. She was detained, illegally, without cause, and on camera. "Ma'am, I assure you, we're reviewing." "Stop reviewing. Release her. Now. Then call me back with an explanation I can take to the White House." The line went dead. In the holding room, the metal door clicked open. Keegan stood there, his expression sheepish, no longer smug. "You're free to go, ma'am. There's been a misunderstanding." Julianne stood slowly. She adjusted her coat, lifted her chin, and looked him dead in the eyes. "You will call it a misunderstanding. The nation will call it something else." She stepped past him, each step measured and deliberate. Outside, in the hallway, several airport employees stood frozen in place, eyes wide. Some were whispering. One young TSA agent mouthed, "Is that really her?" Justice Carter said nothing. She moved toward the exit, her heels clicking with the cadence of inevitability. Outside the airport, the media vans were already arriving. By the time she stepped through the glass doors, she was not just a woman who had been wronged. She was the face of something much bigger, and she wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. It was a packed press conference hall in downtown D.C., just 48 hours later. Cameras lined the back wall. Every major outlet was there. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox had sent 3 correspondents. Social media had already dubbed it Airportgate. The hashtags Justice Carter, Racist Cop, and Flying While Black were trending nationwide. The clip of Chief Justice Julianne Carter being handcuffed had reached over 11 million views and sparked protests in airports from Atlanta to LAX. But Justice Carter hadn't said a word. Until now. She stood at the podium in a charcoal gray suit, her presence commanding but not theatrical. Her silver hair was pinned neatly. She did not flinch as the flashbulbs went off. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice calm, deliberate. "I want to make something very clear. This is not about me." The room quieted instantly. "This is about what it means to be black in America, even in 2025. I am the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and yet that did not protect me from unlawful detention, suspicion, and humiliation at the hands of 2 officers who saw my skin before they saw my credentials." Gasps whispered through the crowd. "They didn't check my name. They didn't verify my position. They didn't ask thoughtful questions. They went straight for the cuffs. Not because I posed a threat, but because they couldn't imagine someone like me could be who I said I was." She paused, let it land. "I want you to think about what that means for everyday Americans who don't sit behind the highest bench in this nation. If I can be profiled, so can your mother, your daughter, your pastor, your neighbor, and so many already have." Reporters scribbled furiously. Several had tears in their eyes. I will not be pressing civil charges, not because there was no injustice, but because justice must be broader than punishment. I want reform, not retribution. A murmur passed through the room. Surprise, respect, confusion. Think of immediately, I am petitioning Congress to launch a full-scale inquiry into TSA and airport security profiling practices nationwide, and I am forming a federal task force comprised of legal scholars, civil rights leaders, and former law enforcement to redesign federal travel screening standards that do not rely on race, gender, or appearance as the basis for suspicion. Cameras snapped like machine gun fire. We cannot keep pretending these are isolated incidents. They are not. They are systemic, and the system must change. Then she stepped back. No tears, no dramatics, just truth and resolve. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, Officer Brian Keegan sat alone in a small windowless conference room at TSA headquarters. He had been placed on administrative leave. Officer Sandra Blake, too. The Office of the Inspector General was conducting a formal investigation, and though no one had said the word termination yet, it hung in the air like a loaded weapon. A federal marshal entered the room. "You're wanted in Washington." "What?" Keegan asked, straightening. "Disciplinary hearing, Congressional Oversight Committee. This one's gonna be public." Keegan's face drained of color. But it was just protocol. She looked suspicious. That's all. The marshal didn't flinch. She looked suspicious because she was black? Keegan said nothing. "Get your things." 2 weeks later, the hearing was broadcast live across the country. Chief Justice Carter sat in the front row, not as a victim, but as a witness. Congresswoman Sheila Green chaired the session, her tone unapologetically sharp. "Officer Keegan," she began, "did you or did you not say, upon stopping Justice Carter, you people always think you can talk your way out of trouble?" Keegan shifted in his seat. "I don't recall." Congresswoman Green slammed her hand on the desk. "We have it on tape. Audio enhancement confirms it." He looked down. "You saw an elderly black woman dressed professionally, and instead of asking questions, you chose to escalate. Why?" "I thought she was impersonating someone." "Based on what?" "Her attitude." Green's jaw tightened. Not her credentials, not her ID, her attitude. The silence in the chamber was unbearable. Congresswoman Green turned to the panel. "Let the record show. This is what racial profiling looks like, in its rawest form. It's not just traffic stops. It's not just back alleys. It's federal facilities, Gate 14, business class. It's everywhere." Outside, protesters stood in organized lines, holding signs that read, "I could be her. Flying shouldn't be fear, and dignity is not suspicious." Inside, Chief Justice Carter took the witness stand. "What was going through your mind in that moment?" Green asked her gently. "I was calm," Carter said. "I've learned, through a lifetime, not to meet injustice with rage. But I was tired. Tired of being asked to prove that I belong. Tired of being reduced to a risk factor." She looked toward the officers seated in the chamber. "And most of all, I was sad, because if even a badge can't recognize dignity, then what's the badge really for?" The room was dead silent. Green nodded. "Thank you, Justice Carter." As she stepped down, the entire room stood, not out of politeness, but respect. Even some of the congressional aides wiped away tears. By the end of the month, 3 major airports had already launched pilot programs for facial recognition plus ID validation, removing human profiling from the early stages of screening. A new federal training mandate was passed, requiring every TSA agent to undergo quarterly racial bias training, and more than 30,000 Americans sent letters to Congress supporting Carter's task force. But the real shift was cultural. TV anchors spoke differently about travel safety. Airport staff across the country received anonymous audits, and every officer from rookies to veterans had to watch the footage of Justice Carter in training seminars, not as a scare tactic, but as a mirror. In late fall, Justice Carter was scheduled to speak at Harvard Law's annual Civil Rights Symposium. As she stepped onto the stage to a thunderous ovation, she opened with a single line, "I never wanted to be famous for being handcuffed." The room chuckled softly. "But if that moment was the price of change, I'll pay it again and again." She paused, scanning the crowd of future attorneys, judges, and activists. America can't afford to be comfortable anymore. Not when bias wears a badge. Not when silence gets rewarded. Not when justice is treated like a VIP lounge instead of a basic right. Then, looking directly into the cameras broadcasting nationwide, to every young black woman wondering if you're allowed to take up space, to every traveler who's ever been told you don't look the part, to every officer debating whether respect is optional, remember this: the Constitution doesn't skip people like me, and starting now, the system won't either. The crowd roared, and for the first time in years, change didn't feel like a hope. It felt like a verdict. Months had passed since the incident at Chicago O'Hare, but its impact was still rippling through the country like a slow-moving tidal wave. Headlines had moved on, but the memory of a black woman in handcuffs at Gate 14, despite being the Chief Justice of the United States, had become etched in the collective consciousness. For many, it was a wake-up call. For others, a long-overdue confirmation of what they'd always known. But for Julianne Carter, it wasn't just about the moment. It was about the aftermath. She never returned to that gate, never set foot in that terminal again. Not out of fear, but out of resolve. Instead, she traveled to schools, police academies, bar associations, and even church basements. She sat in circles with people who'd never met a judge, let alone one who looked like her. She spoke plainly, not like a public official but like a neighbor, a mentor, a mother. "You don't need to sit on the Supreme Court to demand fairness," she would say. "You just need to believe you deserve it." In one memorable stop at a high school in Birmingham, a young black girl stood up and asked, "How did you stay calm when they put the cuffs on you?" Justice Carter paused, then smiled softly. "Because they can cuff my wrists, but they'll never touch my mind, and they certainly can't erase my title." That line went viral all over again. Back in Washington, her proposed task force was no longer a task force. It had grown into a permanent agency, the National Office for Equitable Security. It now oversaw everything from TSA protocol to airport police training, and even implemented anonymous reporting tools for racial bias incidents at federal facilities. But perhaps the most powerful shift wasn't in policy, it was in perception. People started looking differently. Airport staff now double-checked ID badges before jumping to conclusions. Passengers intervened when they saw questionable behavior. A quiet sense of accountability had begun to grow in places it never had before. The fear was still there. Yes, but it had company now: awareness. As for Officers Keegan and Blake, they were dismissed from federal service after a lengthy review. Their names became cautionary tales in training manuals and legal workshops. Neither faced prison time, but both had to testify publicly during civil rights hearings, an experience many said was more humbling than any sentence could have been. One evening, while flying back from a civil rights panel in Atlanta, Justice Carter found herself seated beside an elderly white woman who had been silently watching her since boarding. Mid-flight, the woman leaned over and said, "You're her, aren't you?" Justice Carter smiled politely. "I suppose I am." The woman nodded, teary-eyed. "I watched everything. I just wanted to say, thank you for not screaming, for not giving up. You could have gone home. Instead, you stood up for all of us." That moment wasn't recorded. No headlines, no flash, just quiet acknowledgement. 30,000 feet in the air. That's when Justice Carter knew the real verdict had been delivered. Not by a court, not by Congress, but by the hearts and minds of everyday people. The fight wasn't over, but now the silence had been broken. And justice, for once, didn't just arrive, it flew. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But it doesn't bend on its own. It takes people like Justice Carter and maybe even people like you to push it forward." This story isn't just about racism at an airport. It's about standing your ground when the world tries to shrink you. It's a reminder that dignity doesn't wear a uniform, and justice doesn't always sit behind a bench. So if this story moved you, don't scroll past it. Stand with it, like the video, if you believe silence is not an option. Drop a comment if you've ever been judged before being known, and hit that subscribe button, not for us but for every story that still needs to be heard, because the next time someone's rights are on trial, your voice might be the one that tips the scales.